just want to follow up with something, because apropos of the difficulty of making those decisions, and just apropos also of what was said about speciesism, this is a question also for you, Peter Singer. How do you rationalize your contrary views of animal rights and infanticide? The requirements that justify existence, autonomy, self-awareness, and rationality are not satisfied by most animals.
Well, indeed, but there's no inconsistency. I think that exactly the same standards ought to be applied. For those of you who are familiar with the fact that I'm the author of a book called Animal Liberation, but have not read it, and you might know that that book argues that we ought to be vegetarians, you might imagine that this argument is made on the basis of the idea that animals have a right to life. But if that is what you think, you ought to go and read the book, because that is nowhere argued in the book. The book is essentially an argument that animals are sentient beings, as I said right at the beginning in my opening statement. They are beings who have the capacity to feel pain, that their pain matters, that we're not justified in ignoring or discounting the significance of pain because the being that feels pain is not a member of our species. And then the book points out in some detail, in a couple of long chapters, that we inflict a great deal of pain on animals for example, by raising them for food. That this is not a painless process, that this is not a situation in which animals live their normal lives and then suddenly are instantly killed, but it's one in which essentially from the moment of birth through to death, they are simply items of commerce in a vast system of application of modern technology to producing animal products as cheaply as agribusiness can possibly produce them. And that the suffering of those animals in that system counts for nothing as long as it doesn't interfere with the profitability of the system. So that's what the argument is based on. It's based on the idea that we are ignoring the pains and sufferings of sentient beings, not on the idea that they have a right to life. And it's exactly in that way that I defend infanticide or euthanasia for infants in some circumstances, where I think that is also what is in their interests as sentient beings, given the suffering that they are likely to experience if they continue to live. So I don't hold that animals have rights to life that humans of equivalent capacities do not have. It's only where we have the higher capacities that Nigel Cameron mentioned that I think there is a full-fledged right to life. And I think that's something that most, but obviously not all, human beings possess, and that some, but again obviously not all, non-humans possess. Certainly I think the great apes that we mentioned before, the chimpanzees and bonobos and orangutans and gorillas possess it. But how far down it goes, I'm not sure. That's a much more difficult question. So I'm not making the claims I make for animals in terms of anything that's not exactly, should I say, on all fours with the claims that I make for humans.
Nigel Cameron, if all life